In the morning, under the harsh white lights of the Detroit Arsenal tank plant, a brand-new M4 Sherman rumbled forward for the first time. Its steel hull was still warm from welding. The smell of oil and fresh paint hung in the air. Workers in heavy gloves stepped aside as the tank moved toward the inspection line. To the men building it, this was just another vehicle among thousands.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
To a German tank commander fighting in France, it was something close to impossible. Somewhere in the Ardennes, perhaps only weeks later, he might destroy this Sherman with a single well-aimed shot. He would watch it burn. He would report another American tank eliminated. And then, days later, he would see another Sherman rolling toward him as if the first one had never existed. That was the mystery German officers could not explain. During the final year of the war in Europe, American armored divisions lost tanks at a rate that should have crippled any army. In some campaigns, hundreds of tanks were knocked out in a matter of weeks. Yet the advance continued. Roads remained crowded with armored columns. Damaged units returned to battle with fresh equipment. To commanders in the Wehrmacht, this seemed to defy logic. Germany knew what it meant to lose tanks. Each destroyed Panther tank or Tiger represented months of work, scarce raw materials, and a replacement process that was slow and uncertain. The Americans appeared to live by different rules. The story of how the United States replaced more than 500 destroyed tanks without slowing is the story of one Sherman, born in Detroit and sent across an ocean to a battlefield where time itself had become a weapon. The Detroit Arsenal stood outside the city in Warren, Michigan. Opened in 1940, it became one of the largest tank factories in the world. Inside, the process moved with relentless precision. Steel plates arrived by rail, hulls were welded, engines were lowered into place. Turrets were fitted. Radios, guns, and ammunition racks were installed. Workers repeated the same tasks hour after hour, day and night. Men and women who had once built cars now built tanks with the same industrial discipline that had made Detroit famous. By 1944, American factories were producing tanks on a scale unmatched by any other nation. Thousands of Shermans rolled off assembly lines each year. Standardized parts meant a transmission built in one state would fit perfectly into a tank assembled in another. Engines came from established automotive production systems. If one supplier fell behind, another could step in. This flexibility gave the United States something Germany never fully achieved: the ability to mass-produce a complex weapon as if it were a commercial product. The Sherman moving through the Detroit Arsenal that morning was not unique. It did not carry custom armor or rare components. Its strength was that it was ordinary. Every bolt, gear, and bearing belonged to a system designed for speed and interchangeability. If this tank were destroyed, another could replace it quickly because the production process never stopped. After final testing, the Sherman was loaded onto a flat car. Railroad workers chained it down and sent it east. It passed through industrial cities and farming towns, moving toward ports such as New York, Baltimore, and Newport News. Along the way, priority was absolute. The tank did not wait behind commercial cargo. Military transportation controlled the schedule, and the American rail network, the largest in the world, moved equipment in staggering volumes. At the port, longshoremen guided the Sherman into the hold of a cargo ship. Cranes swung overhead. Trucks delivered ammunition, spare parts, and fuel drums. Thousands of tons of war material disappeared into the vessel. The tank was now part of a convoy preparing to cross the Atlantic. This was one of the most dangerous stages of the journey. German U-boats still threatened Allied shipping, though by 1944 their effectiveness had declined sharply. Convoys sailed under escort by destroyers, corvettes, and aircraft. Radar, sonar, and code-breaking had shifted the balance. The odds favored the Allies. Tank after tank reached Europe. The voyage was long and uncomfortable. Salt air coated steel surfaces. Crews inspected cargo regularly. The Sherman sat motionless in darkness while the war moved closer. Somewhere in France, another Sherman was already burning. On June 6, 1944, the Normandy landings opened the long-awaited Western Front. But landing troops was only the beginning. Sustaining them required a logistical effort of unprecedented scale. Artificial harbors, fuel pipelines, truck convoys, and repair depots turned the beaches into the entry point for an industrial river. When our Sherman reached France, it did not drive directly to the front. It entered a network of depots where ordnance personnel inspected and prepared vehicles for combat. Radios were checked, guns were calibrated, minor damage from transport was repaired. The tank was then assigned to a replacement pool, waiting for a frontline unit to need it. That need rarely took long. In the hedgerows of Normandy during July 1944, American armored units fought in close terrain that favored German defenders. Anti-tank guns, mines, and hidden Panthers inflicted steady losses. Tank crews endured exhausting combat. Some vehicles were repaired and returned to action. Others were destroyed beyond recovery. When a battalion lost tanks, replacement requests moved through established channels. Higher headquarters tracked authorized strength and current losses. Depots were positioned to respond quickly. Trained crews, often already assembled, received new tanks and moved forward. The process was administrative, mechanical, and routine. To the soldiers at the front, it felt extraordinary. A crew might escape a burning Sherman one day and be assigned another within days. Their personal equipment was transferred. The new tank was fueled and armed. The men climbed back into steel that looked almost identical to the one they had lost. The war resumed. This system reduced emotional shock as well as operational delay. Familiar controls, standardized radios, and interchangeable parts meant crews required little retraining. A destroyed tank was a serious event, but it did not necessarily remove a unit from combat for long. The Sherman from Detroit eventually reached an armored division pushing across France after the breakout from Normandy. Dust covered the roads. French civilians waved from village streets. Columns stretched for miles. Mechanics rode in recovery vehicles. Fuel trucks followed closely behind. The pace was so rapid that supply officers often struggled to keep up. Then came the battles around Arracourt in September 1944. There, elements of the 4th Armored Division under Major General John S. Wood and Combat Command A under Colonel Bruce C. Clark faced repeated attacks by German Panthers. In fog and rain, American tankers and tank destroyers used superior coordination, artillery, and radio communication to blunt the offensive. German crews destroyed Shermans, but they also lost large numbers of their own vehicles. American losses were replaced. German losses were far harder to recover. This was the pattern that increasingly defined the war. German tanks were formidable machines. Panthers mounted high-velocity 75 mm guns capable of destroying Shermans at long range. Tiger tanks carried even more powerful weapons and thick armor, but they were expensive, mechanically demanding, and difficult to produce in large numbers. Spare parts were often scarce. Recovery under fire was dangerous. Fuel shortages worsened with every passing month. American doctrine accepted that tanks would be lost. The answer was not to build a few perfect vehicles, but to maintain overwhelming operational strength. Standardization, repair, and replacement were built into the system from the beginning. The Sherman from Detroit may have survived its first battle or may have been knocked out by a hidden anti-tank gun. In either case, the larger system continued. If damaged but recoverable, it was towed to maintenance areas. Engines were replaced, tracks were repaired, entire turrets could be swapped. If destroyed beyond repair, paperwork recorded the loss and another tank was issued. Behind the front, ordnance battalions worked around the clock. Welders patched armor, mechanics rebuilt transmissions. Recovery crews hauled disabled vehicles from muddy roads and shell-torn fields. Their work returned thousands of tanks to service, reducing the number that needed total replacement. This distinction was crucial. German commanders often counted every knocked-out Sherman as a permanent loss. In reality, many were repaired and sent back into battle. A tank disabled today might reappear next week with the same crew. By late 1944, the Allied advance slowed near the German border. Supply lines stretched over hundreds of miles from Normandy ports. Yet even at this distance, the system remained effective. Additional ports, such as Antwerp, increased capacity after they were secured and opened to shipping. Railways were restored, fuel pipelines expanded, replacement tanks kept moving. Then, on December 16, 1944, Germany launched the Battle of the Bulge. In the freezing Ardennes forests, German forces struck with surprise and force. American units were overrun. Vehicles burned along narrow roads. Snow muffled the sound of distant artillery. The fighting became some of the most intense of the war. German commanders believed they had created the conditions for a decisive breakthrough. If enough American tanks were destroyed, surely the U.S. Army would falter. Instead, armored divisions such as the 2nd Armored Division, 3rd Armored Division, and 4th Armored Division continued to fight. Replacement vehicles arrived despite winter weather and congested roads. Repair teams salvaged damaged tanks whenever possible. The front bent, but it did not break. For German officers, the experience was deeply frustrating. Tactical successes did not produce strategic collapse. Shermans destroyed at St. Vith, Bastogne, and Selles seemed to be replaced almost as quickly as they were lost. Part of the explanation lay in numbers. The United States had produced tens of thousands of Shermans during the war. Part lay in organization. Replacement pools, repair depots, and transport systems were designed for constant attrition. Part lay in training. New crews and mechanics were available. And part lay in geography. The United States fought from an industrial base untouched by bombing and invasion. Germany fought under the opposite conditions. Allied bombing targeted factories, rail lines, and synthetic fuel plants. Raw materials were limited. Skilled labor was increasingly scarce. Each lost tank hurt twice, once at the front and again in the factory schedule. Captured German documents and post-war accounts reveal a growing awareness of this imbalance. Officers recognized that American industry and logistics gave the U.S. Army a resilience that battlefield losses alone could not overcome. Destroying hundreds of tanks inflicted pain, but not paralysis. Our Sherman from Detroit might have ended its service in Belgium, its hull blackened in a snowy field. Its crew may have survived and climbed into another tank days later. If so, they experienced firsthand what German commanders struggled to comprehend. The true weapon was not the individual vehicle. It was the system that made replacement routine. That system reached far beyond factories and depots. It included steel workers in Pennsylvania, engine builders in Michigan, railroad dispatchers in Chicago, dock workers in New York, merchant sailors in the Atlantic, engineers in France, mechanics near the front, and clerks tracking serial numbers and losses. Most never saw combat, yet their work determined whether armored divisions advanced or stalled. General George S. Patton understood the value of speed. His forces drove across France with extraordinary momentum, but that momentum depended on supply. Patton's famous aggressiveness rested on a foundation of fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and replacement vehicles. Without logistics, even the most daring commander became immobile. The Sherman itself was sometimes criticized for thinner armor and a smaller gun compared with later German tanks. Yet its mechanical reliability, ease of production, and compatibility with a vast support network made it highly effective operationally. A tank that can be built, shipped, repaired, and replaced quickly often contributes more to victory than a superior design produced in limited numbers. By early 1945, the contrast was unmistakable. American armored divisions crossed into Germany with strong vehicle inventories. German units increasingly fielded reduced numbers, improvised formations, and crews short of fuel and training. Tactical skill remained, but the material balance had become overwhelming. When Allied armies crossed the Rhine in March 1945, replacement tanks still moved through the same system that had sustained the campaign since Normandy. Factories continued production, ships continued sailing, depots continued issuing vehicles. The industrial current never stopped. For the average American tanker, this meant something profoundly practical. Survival did not guarantee rest. If a tank was lost and the crew remained intact, another vehicle was waiting. They cleaned out personal gear, checked the radio, loaded ammunition, and returned to combat. The war allowed little time to reflect. For German tank commanders, it created a sense of futility. They could win local engagements, destroy enemy armor, and still face fresh Shermans days later. Every victory consumed irreplaceable fuel and ammunition, while the American machine absorbed the blow. Historians often focus on famous battles and celebrated generals, but the replacement of more than 500 destroyed tanks without slowing reveals a deeper truth. Modern war is sustained by organization as much as courage. Tactical brilliance matters. So does armor thickness and gun performance. But the ability to recover from loss repeatedly and quickly can decide the outcome. The Sherman that rolled out of Detroit at 2:17 in the morning was never meant to be unique. Its power came from being one of many, built by a nation that transformed industrial capacity into battlefield endurance. If it was destroyed, another followed. If that one burned, another was already crossing the Atlantic. German officers could count the wrecks. They could estimate the losses. What they struggled to grasp was that each burning Sherman was only a single link in a chain that stretched from Michigan assembly lines to European battlefields. Breaking one link changed almost nothing. By the spring of 1945, as American columns pushed deeper into the collapsing Reich, the mystery was no longer theoretical. It was visible on every road. New tanks, fresh parts, and repaired vehicles flowed forward in numbers that seemed endless. The U.S. Army did not ignore losses. It planned for them, prepared for them, and replaced them with industrial discipline. That is why the destruction of 500 American tanks did not slow the advance. The answer was not hidden inside the armor of the Sherman. It was hidden in the welders who worked through the night in Michigan, the train crews who moved tanks east, the sailors who crossed the Atlantic, the mechanics who rebuilt disabled vehicles, and the supply officers who treated replacement as a routine fact of war. One Sherman burned in a French field. Another left Detroit before dawn. And somewhere, watching through gun smoke and disbelief, a German commander realized that he was not fighting a single tank, or even a single army. He was fighting an entire continent in motion.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.